Welcome. First of all, it was good to see all of you, maybe not all of you, most of you last week up in Lowell for our celebration of the opening of the meditation space. And thank you, Joseph, for leading the Sunday sit here last week. Has that talk been posted yet? Oh, well, when will it be posted? Tomorrow. So starting tomorrow, you can listen to his excellent talk. Or maybe Tuesday, you can listen to his excellent talk. It was fantastic. I had a chance to listen to the whole thing, and just magnificent. He spoke about many things and spoke very eloquently about trust and the necessity of trust. How we respond to that necessity is very interesting. And one of his many points was that it is very important, it's, you might say, urgent, to respond to this necessity of trust. How do we deal with the fact that you have to trust something? Even if you don't trust anything, you're trusting the sense that you don't trust anything. You're trusting your distrust. You're left with faith in something, somehow, in some way. Which way? It's a big question, a very important question, and I would recommend that you listen to his description, and you might even say exhortation regarding the significance of this point. As he mentioned, he and I have had a little bit of a conversation about this. He came to the Monastic Academy a little while ago, and we had the chance to talk. We had tea, as he mentioned, which is common there. I have tea with a lot of people. And a lot happens in tea. For example, the creation of entire series of Sunday sit talks. So he came and we talked about a few things. And one of the things that came up was his distrust of gurus. Would you say that was an accurate, to just put in a few words? Yeah. And I said something like, ah. Yes? Yeah. It was exactly that. Yeah. In that case, you misquoted me. Because in your talk, you said that I said okay. I basically said okay. I just said, maybe. And I said that in order to open up the possibility of further questions. For example, okay, so what are you doing as a guru here? Huh. But he didn't say that. Instead, the tea just ended. So I felt, I have to say, rather powerless in the moment, you know? Because I, as a guru, it's my job, if I'm that, to the extent that I am that, which I am to a certain extent, I am powerless. I have to do what I'm asked to do. That's what it is to be a teacher. You do what your students ask you to do, regardless of what they ask you to do. You have complete trust in them, complete faith in them, and all you do is respond to their needs. You are totally helpless, without power, and so he didn't ask. So I couldn't answer. That's it. End of story. So the tea just ended. So I thought, okay, let's see here. What do I do in this situation? How can I handle this? And I thought, well, You can't talk to Joseph about this because he doesn't want to, apparently. So he had every chance, but chose not to. So what can I do? And I thought, well, that he has this question may be an indicator that others have such a question, which means that perhaps since I, for whatever reason, set the topics of these talks, I could set this as the topic of some talks, and maybe Joseph and I could have a dialogue in that way. I got to do what I can do. I'm constrained here, handicapped, handcuffed, shackled by my position, and so I have to be creative. So yes, as you thought might be the case, this series did come from you. So thank you to our guru, setting the topic of these talks for months. Well done. I think it's a good topic, so thank you for that. One of the things that Joseph brought up, I think, very eloquently. I think it was done with great eloquence and skill and insight, was the point that a teacher, a spiritual teacher, a guru, should, if seen skillfully, is seen as a tool, as an instrument, as a means by which to achieve an end. And that end is, say, awakening, answering your deepest spiritual yearning. This is a good attitude. It's good to look at teachers in this way, to consider, I have a longing. I want to deal with that. I need to fulfill this yearning, and here is someone who I can use in order to achieve that. This is a very good attitude, and I'd recommend that everyone here become familiar with this attitude. And once you've become familiar with this attitude, which I would recommend, I think I've said that 3 times, right, Jeffrey? Well then, once you're familiar with it, then you should listen to what Jeffrey had to say about this from last week. Have you heard? Is that why you're laughing? Oh, you should listen. Jeffrey took it to the next level. Yes? And he said, well, okay, but anytime that you set up this tool attitude, and now I'll stop because I think you may know where this sentence is going now. I'll stop and repeat for a 4th time. Joseph's point is good. You should consider that one carefully. But then, having considered that carefully, come to see it clearly, even practice adopting it. Having done that, you should then listen to Jeffrey's magnificent reply. Because he said, and you can correct me if I'm mistaken, that if you set up a relationship in which someone is a tool of someone else, then that act of objectification is a kind of a power move that is improper. It's not based on love. It's not based on relationship. It's based on utility. And you turn what ought to be a loving connection into a relationship in which there is power over, in which a person is being used. And in that act, you have, in fact, participated in violence. How did I do?
I think you've improved on me.
I don't think so. You should listen. He was very eloquent. And if you do that, then you can't get the real juice, we'll say, the real mystery of any relationship, much less a teacher-student relationship. And so this sense of technique and tool, instrument, utility is very dangerous to hold. And I really appreciated it, actually, that you said that. I'll just take this 5th time here. I also appreciated that you said that. And I often tell people to think of me as a tool, and I don't think that that's a bad teaching. This is okay, actually. It's a good teaching. It's just that it's not the best teaching. That's all. Once you are familiar with that, then you've become free of an unfortunate consequence of the teacher-student relationship, which is that the student somehow removes themselves from the center of their lives. Somehow puts an imaginary person at the center of their lives, this guru who, let's face it, you don't know very well. You don't even know yourself that well. So what are you doing putting someone else at the center of your life? So that's unfortunate. So you should keep yourself at the center of your life. That's true. And sometimes by calling someone a tool or a means, you can retain your authority over your life. And also understand that this person is offering you a kind of value that is a value according to your own standards, according to your own highest aspirations. So this is a good attitude to take. But this attitude, even though it's a good one, because what you did then is you sort of killed yourself. Yes, you took yourself out of your life, which is to say, in a way, you killed yourself. Don't do that. So in this way, we hope to bring ourselves back to life. But by doing it, unfortunately, we often kill this other person, who's a living person, who's actually a person. Believe it or not, the teacher is a person, which might seem disconcerting and unfortunate, sort of disappointing, right? It's too bad. Oh, well, you might think. And I get this a lot. People say this to me. They'll say, well, eventually I had to accept the fact that you're a person. People say this to me often. Maybe once a month someone says this to me. It's really disappointing. And yet, eventually, I feel proud that I have matured to the point of accepting the fact that you're human. So, this is itself, as Jeffrey is saying, this is one of actually many aspects of what I believe Jeffrey is pointing at. But one facet of this jewel is that once you do that, you in a way kill that person. You take the beauty and the mystery of that person out of the relationship. And if you do that to either person in the relationship, the magic of the love that's possible in relationship is deadened. There is this sense, as he said, of devotion. Devotion that doesn't require power over. It doesn't require someone to be right and someone to be wrong. It doesn't require instrumentality in any direction. Either that I will be the instrument of your teaching or that your teaching will be my instrument. That can fall away, and then another kind of magic can emerge in which both people are fully accepted in the relationship, and yet the relationship isn't about either person. This is a wonderful step forward. But the question comes up again, as Joseph said, a deep question emerges, which is a meaningful question. It's an important question. Is who? Who do you have that relationship with? You have to trust something in order to make that decision. One way to do it is that if you're going to take someone as your guru, it's best if that's someone who is able to take you as theirs. if it's someone who has seen through the human being so fully that they're capable of worshiping everyone, of trusting everyone. So you trust someone who's capable of trusting you. Trusting you as you are, not trusting you as the person who you could become, or whatever mishmash of words people talk about. Not like they trust your potentiality or some meaningless philosophical thought like that. It's not some abstraction. That you as you are, they are capable of seeing you so totally and loving you so completely that they can trust you as is. That they're capable of actually trusting you as is, worshiping you, you could even say revering you as is. Well, then such a person perhaps is worth entering into this relationship with. Someone who sincerely bows down to you every time they see you, if you're with such a person, then it may make sense for you to bow down to them every time you see them, even to physically prostrate before them many times a day, if you've met someone who is not going to be confused by that, because you know that you're just doing your best to reflect back what's happening in the other direction. You're just not very good at that, so you have to physically bow down in order to help yourself along in loving someone that much. But it's someone who won't use that for this kind of power over. This is a real possibility. But how do you know who such a person is? How can you find the qualities so that you can assess which person would be a good such person? And this question was asked last Sunday in Lowell, in the new Zendo, the new meditation hall, by Herschel, who is not here, right? Of course. He's very good at that. He is. It's one of his talents. But he asked the question last week. He said, so some people say this, and that everyone who says other stuff is wrong. Some people say such and such is true, and if you say something else, you're wrong. And other people say such and such is not true. If someone who would say that this is wrong is wrong. Who should we trust? Who can we believe in? Does anyone remember my reply to that question? Thank you. Yes. Who was the first person who said that? Oh, you said it first? Yes. But you remembered it also. Thank you for remembering that. So it was a good question. Herschel really has this question. He's been asking this question for a long time, and it tears him apart. And everyone knows it. I'm not revealing something you shouldn't know about him. He knows it. He knows we all know it. It's a real struggle for him. That struggle that's been decades in the making, it's a governing force in his life. And just so you know, the answer also was decades in the making and is a governing force in my life. And this answer is worth looking at closely, even perhaps for decades. This question also is worth examining very, very closely. And there was a group of people a while back who are known as the Kalamas, who are described in a text called the Kesaputta Sutta, I believe, unless I'm mispronouncing that word. Does anyone know? Maybe not. In the Anguttara Nikaya of the Pali Canon and in the Majjhima Agama of the Chinese translation of the Sarvastivadin canon. It's in the Sarvastivadin canon, but we have the Chinese translation now of it. And they were a lot like us. They were like us in that they lived in a place where a lot of different teachings came and went. A lot of different teachers came and went. And they, in a way that was unusual at the time, had access to many different styles of instruction, many different worldviews. Well, nowadays, we have that more than they did. They just happened to live at a certain crossroads, certain geographic location that enabled that. But nowadays, we have access to more teachings than we know what to do with. As Jeffrey said, we have so many techniques, so many different ways of approaching the path that's what we spend our time doing. We spend our time figuring out which one to use. So they were in the same situation, and they didn't know what to do about it. They had deep confusion about who to trust. And so they heard that the Buddha was enlightened. And so they went to him and they asked him, these people say this, those people say that, they disagree with each other, who should we trust? That's about right. It was a good description of the beginning of it. Joseph also summarized it last week, which is why I'm bringing it up this week. And according to the version in the Theravadan, in the Pali texts, or in that version, the Buddha said, yes, it's very reasonable that you're confused about this. It's reasonable that you have doubts. This is a confusing matter. So I'll tell you this. Don't pay attention to, and he gave a list of 10 things, which I don't have time to get into, to give the full list right now. But basically he said, don't trust tradition. That could be scriptural tradition or oral tradition, various traditions. Don't trust tradition in general. Because, this isn't in this text, but in other texts, he said, because sometimes that's right and sometimes it's wrong. Sometimes it's not recorded properly. Don't trust mere reasoning. Don't trust logical inference. Because sometimes, and again, this is in a different text, but in reference to this, sometimes that's right, sometimes it's wrong. And then finally, don't just trust somebody because of their personality or because of their position. Because sometimes such a person is right and sometimes such a person is wrong. Instead of that, when you yourself know that something is blameworthy, is wrong, and is censured by the wise, don't do it. And when you yourself know that something is blameless, something is good, and praised by the wise, do it. And as Joseph said, it goes from there. And the rest of the text is actually quite interesting, but we have limited time today, so I'm going to stop there for now. With that basic reasoning, he explained, with that introduction, he then says that you can make use of, you could say, experimentation. Experimentation in your life. That if you take up a certain thing, such as greed, pay attention to whether it creates suffering or not. If it does, don't do it. If you take up something like compassion and it creates happiness, then continue to do it. And he takes them through a number of, in this case, thought experiments, but in reference to their own direct experience. And then he says, so in any case, whether, for example, rebirth is true or not, in any case, you have taken an appropriate course of action. So this text has been selected by our society, by our modern society, as essential Buddhist reading. Everyone who writes a book on Buddhism apparently has to make a reference to this text. It seems to be a rule. If you're a modern Buddhist teacher, you must refer to the Kalama Sutta. I have tried to avoid it, and I've succeeded for years, and yet here I am. Yes, it's a rule. I myself, I can't avoid it. It's de rigueur within the Buddhist teaching system, which is very significant because in the past, in other societies, this was just one little text buried somewhere or other in the Anguttara Nikaya. It was, as Bhikkhu Bodhi says, one of the many small foothills within the vast Himalayan range of the Buddhist canon. But nowadays we've elevated it to Mount Everest because this is the essence of Buddhism, we say. This is really what the Buddha taught. And what did he teach? Well, we just heard it. He gave you carte blanche. He said, do what you want. That's what he said. He said, if you think something's the right thing to do, you should do that. And if you don't think something's the right thing to do, don't do that. Do what you want. Do what you think. You're the one who knows. It's your wisdom that you can find within. Look within and trust yourself. Isn't that what he said? That's what people say he said. Really, look it up. It's in the books. Okay, you can get pretty much any book on Buddhism. It's in there. Any modern book in any Western language. Open it up. There it is. Kalama Sutta. Buddha said, do what you think is right. So the first thing to say is that even in this text, that is not what the Buddha said. He didn't say that. He didn't say, do what you think is right. He said that you yourself have to know. You yourself have to confirm or deny. But how do you find out? How do you know if something's right or wrong? Well, there are basically two things. One, do experiments, and two, trust what wise people say. Those are the two things he said. First of all, you need to pay very close attention to your state of mind and the consequences of that state of mind. You need to pay really close attention to that. And two, if wise people say it's good, do it. If they say it's bad, don't do it. Now, I have to tell you, that's a little weird. Isn't it? What was the original question? How do we know who to trust? What's the answer? Well, first of all, trust direct observation. And two, trust what wise people tell you. Isn't that strange? I'm amazed that no one thinks this is strange. I'm amazed that people just read the text and say, look, the Buddha said exactly what I thought. Yes? My society has trained me in individualism, in trusting my feelings, my own reasoning. And the Buddha says right here, trust your own feelings and your reasoning so that you can do what you want. Even though he explicitly says that's not to be trusted in the text. He says it right there. Not your own preferences, not your own reasoning. But we take that because we want it so much. We have been trained to believe in individualism, in my own thoughts and feelings, and in the fact that I am the supreme authority and there should be no one who can tell me what to do. Oh no, I'm the one who says. And so we somehow find that teaching in this sutta. We then put it in all of the Buddhist books until it's just common knowledge that the Buddha was a liberal humanist. Yes, neoliberalism was prescribed by the Buddha. Now we know. So let's move forward with this current agenda. So that is one fascinating point that should be looked at closely, because if there's any single theme that you see in the history of spirituality through world history, through the world, it's that most people, most of the time, mistake their own cultural assumptions for spiritual truth. And if you have a cultural assumption, you're going to look for something, anything, in any tradition, to confirm that so that you don't have to question it. And this is just one more case in which our society has done that with Buddhism. It's done its best to import individualism into the tradition. Even in this case where you cannot find it in this text, if you actually read the text. They take out this one sentence, when you yourself know. It's not even a whole sentence, actually. It's a phrase. It is half a sentence. We're going to take that out. Use it. Yourself is there. Yourself is individualism. The Buddha taught individualism. I'm an individualist. This is great. I don't have to question my life. But what makes this even more fun is that if you go to the just as old, just as authoritative version from the Sarvastivadin canon, it's the same text. So this school, the Theravadins, are saying, when these people asked the Buddha this question, he said what I just reported. He said, don't trust these things, but when you yourself know that something is good, do it. Bad, don't do it. When the wise say it's good, do it. When the wise say it's bad, don't do it. There it is, right? Interesting. Okay. If you look at the Sarvastivadin version of it, they ask him, all these people are coming through. We don't know who to trust. Who should we trust? And he says, of course you don't know who to trust. Of course you're confused about this. Of course you have doubts, because this is a confusing matter. There's no way you could know. You're not enlightened. You don't have the wisdom to know who to trust. Therefore, you should trust me, because I'm enlightened. I have the wisdom. So trust me. I'll just tell you. I'm going to tell you right now. And then he lays it out. He doesn't even say, here are these untrustworthy things. He just lays it out. He says, here's the deal. First of all, I just answered your question, which is trust me. And second of all, here is how you live your life. And he explains it to them. Yes? So in the first text, he takes them through this whole long set of thought experiments in which they come to the conclusion that greed, hatred, and ignorance are bad, and so don't follow them. They're opposites. Relinquishment, letting go, or you could say generosity, compassion, the opposite of hatred, care, and wisdom, true knowledge, that these are trustworthy things. You should live according to these things. In the other version, the Sarvastivadin canon, he just tells them that. Says, I'm enlightened. I know this is true. This is how you should live your lives. Get to it. And what I'd like to ask you to do now is carefully look back. Do what the Buddha said in the first text. Carefully look back at your experience. What were your reactions when you heard that the Buddha said, trust me? Don't trust yourself. You're not trustworthy. But I am. What are your emotional reactions to that? Why is it that our culture feels so comfortable with him saying, when you yourself know these things, act accordingly? But when he says you're not trustworthy, when I know these things, who I am enlightened, when I know and teach such things, act accordingly. Why do we feel so comfortable with the former, such that it's in every Buddhist book, every major Buddhist book that I know of contains a reference to the Kalama Sutta, and none of them contain a reference to this completely opposite teaching that is given in a different tradition's version of exactly the same exchange? Isn't this amazing? I'd ask you to examine within yourself. Why is it? What is it in yourself? Because you're part of this Buddhist spiritual phenomenon. You're part of this. What is it in us that has caused this to happen? So, we have three different answers, don't we? Right? We have three different answers to this question. One is when you yourself know something's good, or when wise people say it's good, do it. We have another one that says there's no way you could know. but I do, because I'm enlightened, so do what I say. And then we have a third answer, which is simply, thank you. So we here, we're a mature spiritual community who look at things carefully. So I'd like to ask you now a few questions about these answers. The first one is it the case that they're different answers? Is it the case that these answers point at different things? This is very important to look at closely, to investigate. There are many different ways of answering that question, of course. Most important thing is ask it. When the Buddha says, don't just trust someone because they're the teacher, isn't that hypocrisy? They went to him because they knew he was enlightened. He had a good reputation. That's why they're asking him the question, and he answered the question. Don't just trust someone because they have a good reputation. They're known to be a teacher. And yet, if you trust that answer, you don't trust that answer. Right? If you trust him on that, then you're not following that teaching. What? This is why I find it so absurd that these modern... Uh-oh. Look out. Now I'm going to start maybe get fiery. These capitalist pseudo-Buddhists mining the tradition for book sales, that this group of people, they say, look, right here in the scriptures it says don't follow the scriptures. I mean, this is ridiculous. People don't even notice the obvious hypocrisy in people calling upon tradition as evidence that you shouldn't follow tradition. It's absurd. What level of mental weakness do you have to have? See, this is terrible. He'll say, look, the Buddha himself said don't trust someone just because the tradition says it or just because they're the guru. That's exactly what you're doing at the moment that you're saying don't do it. I mean, who was it? Epictetus, I think, said that there is no one who more skillfully gives evidence against a certain position than a person who claims it and doesn't live it. Because they have an extra reason to follow it, which is that they're going to have a bad reputation if they're a hypocrite. So if they claim it and they still don't live it, that should be taken as strong evidence that that's wrong. Because not only is it wrong and that they're not following it, but they're even not following it when they have an obvious incentive to follow it. So it must be really wrong. So these people who say don't follow tradition, and I'll tell you why, the Buddha said don't follow tradition. Such people are extremely untrustworthy. They're obviously hypocrites. Right there. Okay, very good. Excellent. Well, let's flip the other one. So the Buddha says, how could you know? You're not enlightened. You should trust me. Yes? I'm enlightened. That's how you're going to know who to trust and what to do with your life. Well, that's obviously hypocrisy, isn't it? Right in that moment, they still are the ones who have to decide if they're going to trust him on that. They can't just trust him. Even if he tells them to, they can't do it. Because they themselves have to decide whether to believe him when he says it. I wish I had a way to compel you to actually examine these texts. Because if you do, you see that either the Buddha was at best an idiot, and at worst a really evil mind control freak. Either that is true, or he was actually talking about something. Something beyond words, something beyond understanding, something beyond the scriptures. That the scriptures are, as Joseph said they say in Zen, which is true, they do, because it comes, I believe, from the Lankavatara Sutra, which Zen is typically connected with, that all of these words, all these teachings, all of these gurus are like the finger pointing at the moon. No matter how much you look at the finger, it's still not the moon. You can look at it for a long time. You can say it's the moon. You can make arguments that it's the moon. You can write the word moon on the finger. It's still not the moon. So what is it that the Buddha is talking about, that these traditions have given us? What is the actual answer to the question? Either you look at it, either way, the answer is the same. It doesn't matter which set of words you attribute to the Buddha. The answer remains the same. Somehow, your mind, your awareness, meets someone's life, someone's teaching, someone's manifestation. Either way that happens, that's what happens. You are aware of something. That's what happens. That just is what happens. And you have to deal with that. You have to deal with the trustworthy and untrustworthy qualities of your own mind, the skillful and unskillful qualities of your own mind, the wholesome and unwholesome qualities of your own mind, as they meet that in others as it comes to you. Either way, there's this meeting, there's this contact of trustworthy and untrustworthy qualities with trustworthy and untrustworthy qualities. Either way, we're left with that. And if you see it in that way, then something tangible starts happening. Something that's actually real and not just a theory, not just something out of a scripture that someone can have opinions about, but something concrete in this moment starts to actually occur that purifies the unwholesome, the unskillful qualities of our minds without turning it into this power dynamic. Either way power dynamic. When we approach others with that sense, then for the first time we're in a position to appreciate the ways in which others have already gone through that process. And we're in a position to skillfully hand over our power, give away our power, give away the need for power, such that something can happen, a purification can happen, that's beyond our assumptions, that's beyond what we would have made happen. Because we see that it's right in that, what we would make happen, that the skillful and unskillful qualities of our minds are most clearly manifest. That, giving that up, is to give up power. We find the value in that, and with that we see the value in the possibility of giving that to those who have already done it. Because when we see that this contact is the essential moment, then it's no longer about my mind and your mind. It's no longer about a student and a teacher. It's just about this process of purification. It's just about the unfolding of liberation. the direct clarification of the source of suffering and its relinquishment. There's just that. That is what is happening. This is wondrous. It's wondrous already. It's not wondrous because it gives you something. It's not wondrous because you get something out of it. And so, I'd ask, when Herschel asked me, how do you know who to trust? And I said, thank you. If it's the case that you don't get anything out of such a relationship, what was I thanking him for?
Trusting him.
Oh, no, not at all. Not in the slightest.
Well, he asked you a question.
But that's not what I was thanking him for. He did ask me a question. You're right about that. But no, I was not thanking him for trusting me.
You were thanking him.
Hmm?
Were you thanking him for not trusting you without examining whether you should be him?
No.
For being a good student of the Dharma?
For genuinely asking a question?
No.
For fighting for the truth.
For that moment of connection?
No, these are all things that one could achieve or acquire.
For teaching us.
I don't mean to be so strict with you that it's unreasonable, but no.
For courage?
Of course I appreciate his courage, but it's just not what I was thanking him for. I appreciate his struggle. I appreciate his clarity and our connection and all of that. Of course, I appreciate all that. Naturally, I could thank him for all of those things. It just wasn't what I was thanking him for at that moment, because those things wouldn't have answered his question. He actually had a question. I think it's important to understand the question. Otherwise, the answer just becomes doctrine. It's not about a relationship. It's not about devotion, as one might say. Very good.